How World War II changed the global economy and everyday life. World War II, a conflict that shook the planet, leaving behind destroyed cities, millions of lives lost, and it seemed nothing but pain and loss. But there were other consequences which we often forget. How did this catastrophe change the world? How did it affect the economies of countries? And why did war become a catalyst for global changes that led to incredible growth and prosperity? While nations were consumed with destroying each other, another war was happening in the background. It was a war for resources, labor, and production. Countries began to mobilize their economies like never before. While some powers descended into poverty and ruin, others found ways to use the power of conflict for their own growth. Let's take a look at what happened to the economies of the countries caught at the front. Countries like the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union faced catastrophic consequences. Destroyed cities, lost equipment, and broken infrastructure. Recovery required not only huge financial investments, but also immense effort to lift the country from its knees. The time when every enterprise was repurposed for wartime needs and the economy existed under tight control shaped new mechanisms for production and labor. At the same time, on the other side of the world, in the United States, the war became a catalyst for economic boom. A huge number of jobs appeared in factories producing armaments. Mass production, never seen before, moved toward technologies that later became the foundation for global economic growth. Suddenly, industry began to grow at an unprecedented rate. The same technologies that were used to create weapons were then adapted for civilian needs, creating new industries and opportunities for millions of people. For America, it was a moment of triumph, but also a moment of change. Industry, scientific advancements, and high technologies took the economy to new heights, allowing the U.S. not only to recover, but to become a global leader in both the economy and politics. But for many other countries, especially those in the heart of the battles, recovery was not so easy. Europe had it especially hard. Cities lay in ruins, the economy was destroyed, and millions of people lost everything. But it was in the post-war period that Europe experienced remarkable recovery, thanks not only to internal efforts but also to external aid, including through the Marshall Plan, which brought billions of dollars in economic recovery assistance. However, to recover, Europe had to not only build from scratch but also update old systems, find new ways of production, and utilize advanced technologies. Technologies that would have been impossible before the war now became the foundation for recovery and further growth. This period marked the beginning of a new era, where economics, technology, and culture united to bring the world to a completely new level of life and interdependence. No historical lessons were forgotten, and although the war brought countless casualties, it paradoxically served as a catalyst for the new economic and cultural order in the world. When the wars ended, not only did the economy change, but everyday life also underwent unprecedented transformations. We often think about how the war changed governments, armies, and industries. But what about the people? How did the war change their everyday lives, habits, and even culture? First, the economic changes caused by the war led to the creation of entirely new types of jobs. Women, who before the war most often stayed at home, became the main workforce in factories and plants. This was a revolution in the social structure of society. Women not only worked in armament production, but also contributed to fields that were previously considered male, such as engineering, science, and even military operations. But the change was not limited to the workforce. After the war, there was rapid growth in new technologies, many of which were initially created for military needs. For example, computers, which were used for code breaking, were later adapted for civilian use. Inventions such as plastic materials, radar, aviation, and many others began to be used in various fields of life, from medicine to transportation systems. Technological progress became part of everyday life. Early mass production, new building methods, new types of transport and communication, all this became the foundation for a new way of life. Mobility, access to goods, improved living conditions, none of this would have been possible without the changes brought about by the war. Many people also began to have more opportunities for travel, work, and education than ever before. The economy began to grow, and with it came the creation of new social standards, especially in countries that had undergone recovery like Germany and Japan. Plan, this led to the creation of a new middle class, which became the foundation for the prosperity of the post-war decades. However, the changes affected not only the civilian population. After the war, governments began to reassess their approaches to international trade, foreign policy, and the creation of alliances. The Marshall Plan, which became the U.S. response to the destruction of Europe, helped restore not only infrastructure but also trust between countries. All of Europe began to build more open and interdependent economic systems. These changes also had an impact on culture. After the war, world leaders began to pay attention to cultural exchange, which influenced mass culture. Cinema, music, art, all of these became not just sources of entertainment, but also ways to establish connections between nations. Hollywood, in particular, became a symbol of culture, and the American way of life became central to the global stage. At the same time, society was undergoing restructuring. The war destroyed old social stereotypes. Many people who survived the wars began to question the old norms, demanding greater equality, better living conditions, and more participation in political life. This was especially true of the youth, who quickly realized the importance of change and demanded a new world, free from violence and injustice. Changes even affected cities. Many of them were rebuilt from scratch and constructed according to entirely new standards. Architecture, design, and technology, all of this became part of the new era. Everyday life became more dynamic and diverse, with an emphasis on improving quality of life, accessibility to goods and technologies. Thus, World War II became a catalyst for colossal changes that affected the entire world. The economy, science, culture, and everyday life all underwent transformations that impacted generations of people. The world not only recovered from the devastation, but also created new foundations for future prosperity. This is the legacy we see today. And although the war brought suffering and destruction, it became the foundation for changes that would likely have been impossible without this global conflict. It was a time when the world and the economy changed not only because of destruction, but also because of the creation of a new world, a new order. How the Marshall Plan saved Europe and changed the world. Uncovered facts. After the end of World War II, the world faced the consequences of a globally shattered economy, social chaos, and political instability. Europe was literally wiped off the map, and colossal efforts were needed to rebuild the devastated countries. Instead of leaving this process to the discretion of local governments, the United States decided to intervene on a global level. This is how the Marshall Plan was born. An economic aid program that not only helped Europe but also significantly strengthened the position of the United States on the world stage. 1947. European countries were engulfed in ruin. France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, all of these countries had experienced destruction from the fighting, lost thousands of lives, and had their cities reduced to rubble. Infrastructure, industry, and agriculture were all destroyed. Millions of people lost their jobs, and the economies of these countries came to a halt. During a time when every country was consumed by solving its own problems, the United States offered not just aid, but a strategic program for the recovery of Europe. Why did America decide to invest such colossal sums in foreign economies? The answer lies in two aspects: political and economic. The United States, realizing the importance of strengthening its position in post-war Europe, saw Europe's recovery as the key to long-term influence on the world. At this time, the Cold War was already on the horizon, and the U.S. could not afford to let a shattered Europe fall under the control of the Soviet Union. The Marshall Plan became not only an act of aid, but also a powerful tool in combating the spread of communism in Europe. $13 billion. This amount offered by the U.S. would be equivalent to more than $100 billion today. But what was behind this massive offer? First and foremost, it wasn't just funding. The Marshall Plan covered many aspects of reconstruction: economic aid, equipment supplies, technology, help with manufacturing, and construction. Most importantly, the U.S. offered not just money but full access to its market and technologies, enabling Europe to not only rebuild but also reach a new level of economic growth. For many countries, such as Germany and France, this plan was a salvation. Germany, which had been left in ruins after the war, was able, with the help of the plan, to not only restore its industry but also rebuild its economy, emerge from the crisis, and become a leading economic power in Europe. France and Italy, also devastated by the war, were able to restore their agricultural output, construction, and industrial infrastructure. The Marshall Plan created a powerful incentive for the development of production and economies in these countries, as well as providing jobs for millions of people. So what happened in Europe after this step? U.S. aid wasn't limited to just financial means. Including Europe in the American economic system meant that European countries became part of a new economic order focused on the free market and open trade borders. The U.S. offered Europe not only money, but also access to American markets and helped create a system of international trade that would later become the foundation for the development of the global economy. But what was the reaction of other countries to the U.S. offer? Amidst these changes, the Soviet Union rejected the Marshall Plan and insisted that the countries of Eastern Europe not accept U.S. aid. Thus, Europe was effectively divided into two blocks: Western countries, which accepted American aid and economic recovery, and Eastern Europe, which remained under the firm control of the Soviet Union. This became one of the first manifestations of the Cold War, as the economic recovery of Western Europe began, while a harsh political and ideological struggle for influence emerged. The impact of the Marshall Plan was not only economic but also political. By offering the recovery plan, America strengthened its ties with Western European countries, ensuring long-term cooperation and political stability. This played a key role in the formation of NATO, where the U.S. became one of the leading players. The Marshall Plan not only rebuilt Europe but also laid the foundation for the creation of a new world order. With its help, not only did the economies of countries begin to recover, but the integration of European nations into the new global economic system based on the free market began. But what happened next? How did the changes brought about by this plan affect people's daily lives and the further development of the post-war world? After most Western European countries accepted aid, European economies began to demonstrate incredible growth rates. Germany, France, and Italy not only rebuilt their devastated cities and infrastructure, but also became leaders in various industrial sectors. The Marshall Plan played a crucial role in creating conditions for industrialization, modernization of agriculture, and rapid growth of consumer markets. However, the Marshall Plan's aid was not unconditional. It required the countries receiving help to make certain economic and political commitments. The countries receiving aid had to accept market reforms, which in turn helped strengthen democratic institutions in Europe. The U.S., through its economic power, essentially created the conditions for the emergence of a new world economic order where the free market and capitalism became the driving forces. The Marshall Plan also had significant benefits for the United States itself. By investing in Europe's recovery, America strengthened its political and economic positions on the international stage. The plan became an important tool for spreading American ideology, promoting capitalist and democratic values in the post-war world. This solidified the U.S. as a leading global power, while Europe moved towards stability and economic growth. But what happened to Eastern Europe? The Soviet Union, having rejected the plan and urged its allies not to accept U.S. help, remained isolated. The countries of the Eastern Bloc remained economically and politically dependent on the Soviet Union, which determined their future development path. They found themselves in conditions of a strict state-planned economy, in contrast to the Western European countries that began developing under market reforms. This led to a significant economic and political divide between the East and West, which later became the foundation for the Cold War. Over time, despite rejecting the aid, the Soviet Union began to realize the need for economic reforms. This became one of the reasons why, later in the 1980s, the USSR was forced to adopt reforms similar to those proposed under the Marshall Plan. However, the changes occurring in Eastern European countries were much slower than in the West and did not bring such positive results. Additionally, we cannot forget the cultural consequences of the Marshall Plan. Thanks to economic recovery, European culture began to change. Under the influence of American ideas and technologies, a form of cultural exchange occurred. Hollywood, American movies, and music began to become popular worldwide. This became the foundation for the development of global mass culture, which continues to influence all aspects of life today. After the official aid program ended in 1952, Europe had already started to develop independently. The economies of the rebuilt countries began to operate at full capacity, and countries began participating in international trade. As a result, the European Union was later formed based on economic integration and political cooperation, which was previously non-existent before World War II. Despite the successes of the Marshall Plan, it is important to remember that it was also a strategic move in the global power play. It strengthened the economy of the U.S. and Western Europe, creating long-term dependence on the American economy. At the same time, it became one of the factors that fueled the opposition between the East and the West, which initiated the Cold War. As a result, the Marshall Plan became not only an act of aid, but also a significant milestone on a global scale, one that changed the course of world history. It led to the creation of a new international order, strengthened American influence, and contributed to the long-term economic and political prosperity of Western European countries. However, its consequences are still felt today, as the world built on the foundations of the Marshall Plan continues to influence economics, culture, and politics, both globally and in the countries that received the aid.
This video is intended for educational and documentary purposes only. It contains no ideology or propaganda. He died in a bunker. Berlin lay in ruins. The Soviet flag rose over the Reichstag, and Hitler vanished. But not completely, because he had a family, brothers, nephews. Their names didn't become symbols of evil, but their fates are no less disturbing. This is a story you won't find in school books, but it matters. Let's begin with his father, Alois Hitler. Alois was violent, impulsive, and abusive. He beat young Adolf, pushed him toward a military career. He himself was born illegitimate, the son of a peasant woman and an unknown man. That gave rise to a legend that Hitler's grandfather was Jewish. But historians have found no evidence. None. The rumor remains just that, a rumor. Alois had 3 wives and 7 children. From his third wife, Clara, came Adolf, but there were others, half-siblings, and it's they who survived the war. One half-brother lived, Alois Hitler Jr., a man with a difficult past, prone to drinking, petty crime, instability. In his youth, he used the name Hitler, but during the Third Reich, he rejected it. He tried his hand at the restaurant business, failed repeatedly, moved often, once arrested for running a brothel, eventually settled in Austria. He had several children, one of them, William Patrick Hitler, Hitler's American nephew. William was born in Liverpool, his mother, Irish. His father, Alois Jr., abandoned the family early on. Later, William became the only relative to personally meet Adolf after he came to power. He traveled to Berlin in the 1930s, hoping for a cushy job, but Hitler treated him coldly. William became a problem. He threatened to publish a tell-all book. He was blackmailing the Führer. In the end, he fled, through France to the United States, and then did something no one else in the family ever dared. He joined the U.S. Navy and fought against his uncle. This is not myth, it's documented. William Patrick Hitler served in the U.S. Navy. He was wounded, granted citizenship, and after the war, changed his name. He became William Stewart Houston, lived in New York, worked in a lab, married, had 4 sons, and gave them strict orders never to speak of their lineage. 3 of his sons lived into the 21st century. They made a silent pact. No marriages, no children. So the bloodline would end. The story reached a few historians. A documentary was made, The Last of the Hitlers. But there's more. Adolf had a sister, Paula Hitler, the youngest sibling. She survived the war. She worked as a stenographer in Vienna, lived under a fake name, Wolf. After the war, she was interrogated by U.S. officers. In an interview, she called Adolf kind and caring. She denied his crimes. Paula never married, had no children. She died in the 1960s, alone. There was Angela, too, a half-sister, her daughter. Gaily Raubal. Gaily lived with Hitler in his Munich apartment. Their relationship was unusually close. In 1931, she died. Officially, suicide, but some believe she was silenced. Her death shattered Hitler. He became withdrawn, more obsessed with control. Angela, Gaily's mother, broke ties with her brother. She condemned the regime, lived in Salzburg in hiding, died in 1949. There were distant relatives on his father's side, some in Austria, others in Germany, a few in Canada. Nearly all changed their names and disappeared. Historians tried to track them. Many vanished without a trace. One thing remained constant. None of Hitler's relatives embraced the name. None tried to exploit it. They chose silence, not redemption, not justification, just erasure. Silence as punishment or protection. But Hitler did not vanish. He remained in textbooks, archives, documentaries. His family did not. But the story didn't end there. After the war, the CIA and British intelligence became interested in whether any of Hitler's relatives were alive. They feared Nazi loyalists might use them as symbols. Internal reports were compiled. Most remain classified. One mentions a Johann Hitler living in Argentina, allegedly arrived in 1947 under a false name. No confirmation. But the report stayed buried for 40 years. There were other rumors. In Canada, in Brazil, even in Spain, journalists, historians, Nazi hunters, all searched. Most leads, dead ends. A French reporter once interviewed a man in Germany who claimed to be the grandson of Hitler's half-brother. He refused to be filmed. His name was never made public. Talk of a fourth Hitler, a younger brother of Alois, circulated in the 1950s, supposedly relocated to Venezuela. In 2008, a German blogger claimed to have found his descendant. DNA testing? Never done. That's the problem. Most evidence, gone. People died. Documents were burned. Witnesses stayed silent. One theory suggests William Patrick had not 4 sons, but 5. One of them allegedly moved to Australia. The source? An unsigned letter, found in the New York Times archive, dated 1991. No follow-up, no proof. After 1945, the Hitler name became cultural taboo. Silence wrapped around it like a shroud. Myths, speculation, and conspiracy filled the void. In the 1980s, 13 people in Germany still officially bore the surname Hitler. By 2020, only one remained. He changed his name after moving to the U.S. In Austria, the name is banned from registration. In Germany, not banned, but discouraged. And the properties? The house in Braunau where Hitler was born? Debated for decades, eventually seized by the Ministry of the Interior, now being turned into a police station. No plaque, no memorial. The Munich apartment where Gaily lived, now an office, no markings. Address unpublished. The family's fate became part of Germany's long process of reckoning, Vergangenheitsbewältigung, confronting the past. But questions remain. Could the family have stopped him? Did they know what he would become? Or were they just afraid? No one can say, because the loudest part of this story is not the crimes. It's the silence that followed, and a name no one wanted to carry ever again.